Welcome to Animology, a podcast about language, the animal-related words and expressions we use every day, and how they affect and reflect our relationship with animals. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. You can find me at ColleenPatrickGoudreau.com and this podcast at animologypodcast.com. And of course, be sure to subscribe to Animology at iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. And thank you for sharing and leaving ratings and reviews. I appreciate it so much. Word of mouth is really the best way to share, and supporting it is the best way to keep it going. So please help support this podcast at patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau to keep it going, like all of our supporters and like A Well-Fed World, a hunger relief and animal protection organization who has very generously given Animology a grant to support some of the episodes. So thank you, A Well-Fed World at awfw.org. Dispersed between and among our regular episodes of Animology are special episodes in which I sit down with other language junkies to talk about animal-related words and expressions. Today's episode is the semantics of meat with my guest, Paul Shapiro. Semantics play a significant role in shaping public perception about animals and animal welfare. The meat, dairy, and egg industries go to great lengths to remove callous or harsh terminology and replace it with less emotive or provocative terms. This is evident not only in their own internal literature, but also in their carefully chosen marketing language, labeling terms, and public survey questions. Today, I'm talking to someone who knows all this too well and who has known it for most of his life, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this. This man was self-actualized when he was born. And it's really annoying how compassionate and funny and intelligent and charismatic he is. But don't tell him I said that because it'll go to his head. When he was 16 years old, Paul Shapiro founded an animal advocacy organization called Compassion Over Killing. That is today a very successful and very effective organization located in Washington, D.C. that focuses on cruelty to animals in the agriculture industry. Today, Paul is vice president of policy at the Humane Society of the United States. Paul shares my passion for both language and animals, and I think by the end of this episode, you will be as charged about both as we are. And for supporters at the $10 level and above, it might take me a little while to get the written transcript over to you since this was recorded with no script. But while you wait, I am sending you an extra gift. We kept the recording going after the interview stopped, and Paul and I kept talking about other language-related issues and, of course, food. So let's get started.
Great to be with you.
Really good to have you here. I don't know if excited to talk about this is the right word, but it kind of is, because I think language is so fascinating and so important, and especially words we use to convey the truth or conceal it is so important, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
I'm excited to talk about it, and I'm excited to be talking with you because, as you know, and I'll share with your listeners, not only am I a listener of this podcast and a subscriber, but I am a fan. And as you know, I've bought many of your books. In fact, my mom is a regular user of one of your books, the vegan baking one. And I really am a big lover of words and of animals. So it's hard to think of a podcast that has a greater intersection of my own interests. So I'm psyched to be talking with you.
Yay. And I just remembered you talking about your mom. I remember the first time we connected was now 15 years ago, because you wrote a letter to Veg News magazine in response to the menu that was printed, because we were featured, my husband and I, for the wedding issue. This was back when it looked like a newspaper. And you wrote a letter saying, if that's what a vegan menu looks like at a wedding, I'm going to get married.
Well, 15 years later, I have not succeeded in that aim, sadly, but happy 15-year anniversary.
So one of the things, I don't think people really understand how much you have to read. We as animal advocates, but I think you in particular, have to read, delving deep into the meat, dairy, and egg industries, certainly their publications, certainly their press releases, their marketing, all of it. I don't think people really understand. So I don't know what else you read, but I have a feeling you read a lot of industry journals. Can you name some of those?
Sure. What else would I do with my evenings and weekends? Yeah, I do. You're right. I like it, and I find it useful to read publications like Feedstuffs and Meat and Poultry and Meeting Place. That's MEAT Place, and others, because it's important to not only know what the animal agribusiness industry is up to, but I think it's important to not just surround ourselves with the vegan echo chamber where all you're doing is talking to people who agree with you and you're only reading things that affirm the opinions that you already hold. And so I value reading it not only to see what they're up to, but also just to expose myself to different opinions that are often contradictory to my own. And so, like, for example, just today I was reading in a publication called Watt Ag. That's WATT. And they had this thing on like 5 ways to combat animal activists. And that's the type of thing I would love to know, because they're basically trying to prevent our undercover investigations. That was the main thing they were trying to combat. And it's helpful for us to know what they want to do to try to prevent us from exposing what they're doing to animals. So I do read them. I find them useful, and I encourage others to do so too.
I don't comb these journals like you do. I have other publications on my nightstand. However, I am aware of the language they use, certainly in their publications, also in their marketing language, of course. And it seems to me, I don't think it's an understatement to say that these industries characterize their standard practices with language that basically sanitizes what is pretty ugly. And it reminds me of George Carlin's fantastic stand-up routine about euphemisms. He was such a bright light. He's so missed. And one of the things he said about words and language and euphemisms, he said, you can't be afraid of words that speak the truth. I don't like words that hide the truth. I don't like words that conceal reality. I don't like euphemisms or euphemistic language. And American English is loaded with euphemisms because Americans have a lot of trouble dealing with reality. Americans have trouble facing the truth. So they invent a kind of soft language to protect themselves from it. I don't think it's just Americans. I think we humans tend to do this, but it's really not just individuals creating euphemisms on their own. We certainly do. But as consumers and recipients of a constant flow of advertising, we are influenced by these industries whose marketing language dominates and which has the effect of concealing the truth and sanitizing violence. So what are some examples you see coming from the meat, dairy, and egg industries?
Well, first, Colleen, anybody who's quoting George Carlin is a friend of mine, because I really do think of him as the best stand-up comedian of all history. I really do. Living or dead, I think of him as like the king of comedy. And in fact, so much of what he did is not even comedy, it's just commentary.
Social commentary, yeah.
Yeah. He's really, really brilliant. Yay. But yeah, I mean, you're so right, and of course he is so right. And the amount of times that the animal ag industries do try to sanitize violence against animals with language is voluminous. You can look, for example, at what happens in the egg industry, where half of the chicks who are hatched are male, and they get thrown into grinders that just grind them alive on the first day on Earth. And the industry, of course, doesn't call it chick grinding. They don't call it chick shredding. They don't call it chick blending. All of those would be accurate. Instead, they use the very sanitized maceration. They just macerate them. And it's like, first of all, I don't think most people even know what macerate even means. But it is a great example of just trying to hide what it is that they are doing to animals. The same thing was so in the veal industry. Now, veal has really waned in popularity. Very few people eat it anymore. In fact, I can't tell you how many times I hear from people who say, "Oh, like I eat meat, but I would never eat veal." It's almost like it's like that one product that you can't hear the word without conjuring images of animal cruelty. But there was an effort by the veal industry for a while to, instead of calling the crates where these baby calves are kept crates, which is clearly what they are, we're going to call them cribs. This is where you would keep a baby. You know, you put your baby in a crib. Why wouldn't you put a calf in a crib? It keeps them safe. They're not going to roll out. And this never really took off, but it was a pretty clever idea. And there's a more modern version of it in the pork industry, where many of them have switched from calling the crates that the pigs are in, from gestation crates, which is what the term that was used for a while, now just to maternity pens. where the pigs are kept not in 2-foot wide crates that prevent them from turning around for their whole lives, but they're kept just in maternity pens. Isn't that a nice thing?
I've even seen individual gestation accommodations.
How nice! I mean, if you were, if you had just given birth, wouldn't you want your own accommodations? You just want to be in with a whole bunch of other mothers.
Exactly.
No. I mean, you want your own maternity pen, your own accommodations. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I remember one time there's this guy. I won't even validate him by stating his name, but he's an industry spokesperson. And he wrote this piece about battery cages for egg-laying chickens, in which he compared them to a hotel room with room service, where everything is brought to them in their hotel room. Like, they don't have to go out for food, they don't have to go out for water. Everything is right there. And you think about these poor birds who are immobilized for their whole lives. They can't spread their wings. Each bird has less space than a sheet of paper on which to live for her entire life. And then think about, what hotel have you ever stayed in where you couldn't raise your arms, or for that which you couldn't leave, you couldn't walk out the room.
Yeah, it's called prison.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in fact, I mean, interestingly, we don't even treat the most heinous criminals in our society the way that we treat farm animals. We wouldn't take murderers or rapists and put them in prison cells where they literally can't lift their arms or where they can't turn around. I mean, prison conditions are often very bleak and harsh for prisoners, but murderers and rapists don't get treated the way chickens and pigs do on our factory farms. And it begs the question of, like, what crime did these animals commit to deserve this type of punishment? And of course, the answer is that they were just born into the wrong species. That because they were born as chickens or pigs, we treat them with greater callousness and greater cruelty than we would treat those who have actually committed really heinous crimes.
Yeah, some other examples from both the egg and I think the chicken industry. Obviously, debeaking. I think the public is pretty aware of what debeaking is. It's the burning or cutting off of the tips of birds' beaks without anesthesia. But what are some terms you've seen for debeaking instead of debeaking?
There's two. So the two ones that the industry likes to use are beak trimming, so that it's similar to nail trimming. You just think, you cut your nails, we cut their beaks, right? It's just a trim. Well, that's not really true. I mean, the part of the beak they're taking off is actually very well innervated, so it's not like cutting your nails, which is just like some dead keratin, which you don't feel. Rather, we are really injuring them when we burn or cut part of their beaks off, and it also prevents them from exploring the world in a way that they would, because chickens use their beaks like we use our hands. But anyway, so you got beak trimming, and then my favorite is beak treatment. It's like a treatment. It's like you're going into the spa for a treatment. Like they just give them a little beak treatment. No big deal. And there's other examples for these poor birds, too. I mean, when forced molting was a really big deal in the egg industry for a while, where they starved birds to manipulate their laying cycle. And they would starve them for up to 2 weeks at a time. And keep in mind, if you withheld food from your dog for 2 weeks, you're going to jail. But they did this to hundreds of millions of chickens, and nobody went to jail. It was just a common industry practice. But they didn't want to use terms like forced molting, so they first switched to induced molting because they didn't like forced. And then eventually, spurred on by the American Veterinary Medical Association, which often is a big advocate for the agribusiness industry, they call it the hen rejuvenation period. You think about that, the rejuvenation period. They're just going for a fast. It's like a nice, healthy rejuvenation. And they talked about how a lot of these birds have fatty liver syndrome. And so by rejuvenating their livers through feed withdrawal, they can get rid of some of that excess fat. It's really Orwellian, to say the least. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of what Upton Sinclair, the author of The Jungle, said when he said it's difficult to get someone to understand something that his living depends on him not understanding. Yeah. And I think for some of these folks, that's really what it comes down to. Like, it's just hard to grapple with what you're doing for a living when you use terms that really explain it clearly.
For sure. And I think that spills into what Carlin is saying, is that, of course, for the public who are not doing it directly but are indirectly involved, they want to hear that because they want to feel better. We all want to feel better about our actions. We don't want to know that we're contributing to violence. And so when we can sanitize the words ourselves, and I think we're all guilty of it. And I think that's, again, why my work is so dedicated to really encouraging people to use language that is the truth, not in a way that is provocative for the sake of being provocative, but that is truthful for the sake of being the truth.
Yeah, words matter. I mean, the way that we speak shapes the way that we think about things. Yeah. And it really, you want to find the fine line between speaking accurately and, like you said, you don't want to speak in an alienating way, but you want to speak accurately. And by using these types of terms like we've been talking about, like rejuvenation or maceration or cribs or maternity pens, that is not an accurate way. I mean, even if you look at, for example, the industry use of harvest, they don't want to call them slaughter plants anymore. They're harvesting, or maybe they're processing, but they're not slaughtering. And I think it's incumbent upon us to ensure that those types of facilities are called what they are. They are slaughter plants. They are industrial plants that exist solely to slaughter animals who come in alive and leave dead. They're not harvesting crops. They're not just processing pieces of meat. They're slaughter plants.
Yeah.
And it makes a difference to use that type of language.
It does make a difference. I have a meme that says plants are harvested, animals are killed. Euphemisms don't change reality. And that's what we kind of want to do. We want to change reality when we change our language. Some other ones, and certainly riff off of any of these, just a few more, because it's so prevalent. And I think it's also worth saying is that the industries are so aware also that the public they are moved when they hear the truth. So it is a statement, I think, about how afraid of the truth the industry is as well. And I want to say it's not just the industry. There's a lot of backyard slaughterers that use the terms like harvesting and processing as well. So it's not just, these large scale slaughterhouse plants. I mean, it really is people who want to sanitize killing, I think, in general. And we see that in other movements as well. But we also have, I think maybe I see this a lot with the turkey industry. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I see, of course, detowing occurs in the turkey industry. And so instead of detowing, I've seen also similar to what they say about hens, toe clipping, same kind of thing, toe conditioning.
Oh, yeah, and dubbing, too. They use dubbing. It's like dubbing. That was something that we did with VHS tapes when we were kids.
You never heard that.
It's like dubbing isn't amputating parts of somebody's body. It's dubbing is not the right term to use for sure.
Never heard that.
Yeah, it's really sad to see those poor birds. And I mean, the only reason they even do that to them is because they are so overcrowded that they attack each other. And so rather than giving them better living conditions, their response is just to cut off parts of their bodies so they can inflict less damage on one another when they do act out in aggression that's stress-induced.
And then finally, just a couple more. So bleeding birds to death, they say exsanguinated. And of course, the industry practice of killing pigs by slamming their heads against floors or walls, they call it blunt force trauma. I don't know. It is Orwellian.
Totally Orwellian. I mean, if you've ever watched a video of them doing this, I mean, it is truly horrific to see them take a pig by his or her feet and then slam the pig's head against concrete. You think blunt force trauma? I mean, it's like a wrestling move that they're doing. I mean, it's like watching a game of Mortal Kombat. It's repulsive. And so, yeah, there's another one. It's like, oh yeah. And sometimes blunt force trauma, they just call it BFT. And it's like, so you don't even have to think about the trauma, because trauma is a pretty bad word too.
Right.
Like, oh, just use BFT. It's no big deal. It's like, well, actually, it's a pretty horrible deal.
We'll return to my conversation with Paul in just a moment, but just a quick break to remind everyone that Animology is brought to you by the listeners of this podcast, including Platinum supporters David Cabrera and Alexandra Gray, Gwen Mayo, Michal Stone, Amanda Kless, Jennifer and Ben Ellis, Tim Anderson, Ulrich, Renee Marinkovich, Sylvie Raquel, and Peter Liu. And a shout out to some longtime gold supporters, Jennifer Watkins, Jenny McCracken, Sherry Lupiton, and Kenda English. Also, a huge thank you to A Well-Fed World. A Well-Fed World is a hunger relief and animal protection organization whose grant is also making this podcast possible. By signing up at patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau, listener supporters know they're making this podcast possible, and they appreciate the additional perks as well, especially the transcripts to each and every episode. Really helpful for a podcast about words. And you get some fun bonus material, like a longer conversation with Paul once our interview was over. I had to cut out a little bit, but for the most part, you're getting what we talked about once I hit stop on our interview. So check out the different levels and choose your favorite at patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau, or go to animologypodcast.com and click on the donate button. Thank you for valuing this podcast. You are much valued in return. So when we talk about language, when we talk about the industry using this language, I just want the listeners to hear, because I'm all about calls to action. I'm all about what we can do. I also don't believe in language being prescriptivist in terms of telling people what to say and don't say this, but say this. But my message, I guess, would be let's use language that calls it what it is, that says the truth. And not only using it ourselves, but writing letters to the editor, letting editors know. You know, I know there's a movement. I've seen a lot of different movements, like writing to dictionary makers and writing to lexicographers to change the way animals are depicted in the dictionary. Dictionaries reflect public usage. They are not the creators of it. We are the creators of usage. And that means the media, journalists, reporters, writers, they're the ones using the language that reflects what a culture, what the pulse is. And so if we're letting editors know, I'm not really comfortable with that language, and why don't we use this language instead? And do you know when you say blunt force trauma, you're just using an industry term. What it really is this. And so I really encourage people to, again, not only be mindful of their own language and express the truth, as George Carlin would have you do, would encourage you to do, but also really being messengers of that to the media, to the editors who are carrying forth those messages. So there is some hope. There is something we can do. We can do a lot, I think, around not only obviously the practices themselves, but certainly in terms of the language, so that people aren't becoming desensitized to the horrific violence against animals.
I'm totally with you, Colleen. I agree with everything that you just said.
Of course you did, because I paid you. I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm going to cut that out.
We'll work that out. Don't let that go in the final.
I'll delete that. So, okay. So, and to a more positive discussion around this. So one of my pet peeves, and those who've been listening to me for years know, mine are around food and around animal products and plant foods, are words like fake, faux, substitute, analog, replacement, imitation, all of these words that make food from plants sound unappetizing, illegitimate, right? Fake, basically. And we're all guilty of this. All of us, consumers of plants and consumers of animals, we're all guilty of this. So, what are obviously you have thoughts on this. I'm gauging.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about language around what to call plant-based? Well, I'll say foods. I'll just open it up generally to you.
Yeah. Well, the ones that you used, I think, are particularly bad. So fake, who wants to eat fake food? Faux, even like meat analogs. Like, who's eating an analog?
Who wants to eat an analog? Nobody wants to eat an analog.
I don't even tell you what I think of when I hear that word. It's not good.
Okay.
But so, you look at those words and they just make things sound unappetizing. And as we know, food and nearly all of our experiences, we basically perceive our pleasure derived from them based on how we expect it to taste. Like, the expectation controls how you are going to perceive it. And so I'll give you an example. Not that long ago, I was at an Einstein Brothers, and I asked them for a bagel with hummus and veggies. And I got it, and I took a bite out of it, and I was like, this hummus tastes gross. And then I realized it was cream cheese that they had put on there. Like, there was a misorder. So, I was annoyed, of course, by that, and I went back and got a different one. But at first, I just thought it was hummus, and I was like, I didn't even think it was not hummus. I just thought, because I was expecting hummus, I was like, God, this hummus tastes gross. And it wasn't that the food tasted gross. It was just that I was expecting hummus. And so, anyway,
Wait, I have a word for that.
Oh, I'm eager to hear it.
I have coined a word for when you eat an animal product by mistake. If you're vegan and you eat an animal product by mistake, you've lost your veganity.
Oh my God. Well, that is really sad. After 23 years of being a vegan, I've lost my veganity.
Got to start from zero, day one.
Yeah, right. For what it's worth, I didn't even swallow it. I spit it out because I presumed that the hummus had gone bad. I'm like, God, this tastes gross. But
wow,
anyway,
we could really go down the analogy of losing your veganity with that, but we're just going to stop right there.
Yeah.
This
is a family podcast.
Exactly.
So anyway, though, so the point is like how you expect things to taste is going to control how you experience the taste. They did an experiment with this over with these kids, and they gave them bags of carrots in a brown bag and then bags of the same exact carrots in a bag that had a McDonald's logo on it. And lo and behold, they preferred the ones that had the McDonald's logo on it, even though they're the same thing, because they expected McDonald's carrots to taste better. So when we call foods fake food, oh, this is a fake burger, or this is a mock meat, or this is a faux chicken, people are expecting something that is inferior. It's not the, quote, real thing. And it's hard to get around that. So the terms that I like to use are things like plant-based meats, because I think these we can consider them meat. Meat need not come just from an animal. And so I like that. But I also like even just calling it a different type of chicken, like, oh, yeah, this is a chicken sandwich. People are like, oh, really? I'm like, yeah, it's chicken that isn't made from an actual chicken, but this is a better type of chicken sandwich. And so I'll use that sometimes. It can be a little bit confusing for people to do the latter. Like plant-based meat is probably my preferred term.
It is tricky, though, isn't it? Because when you're talking about, there's also associations we have. So because for me, when I'm talking about food and getting people excited about food, we have expectations, as you said, but we also have expectations based on what's familiar in our culture. And so if we say chicken nuggets, non-meat chicken, meatless chicken nuggets or what have you, the idea is I'm still calling it chicken nuggets because you know what to expect when I say, it's going to be a tiny little breaded thing that's a little chewy and that's got some bite, and so it does help because it actually gives people an association so that it also influences their expectation in a positive way.
Yeah, we want people to make the smallest jump possible. Mm-hmm. It's really hard for people to change, and we want them to think this is like really small. So it's not that you're going to be really changing what you're eating; it's that you're going to be enjoying different types of the foods that you already love eating. And you don't want people to think, oh, this is so foreign, like I'm going to have to give up everything. And that's another thing that I hate, actually, is when people talk about giving up animal products.
For sure.
We can't talk about this in a self-sacrificial way. Some people may be into self-sacrifice, most people aren't. And so, like when we're talking about giving up, or when you say, I can't eat that, it's not that you can't eat it. You can eat whatever you want. It's that you won't eat it. Indeed. Or that, I like to talk about, instead of giving up meat, talk about enjoying more vegetarian options or enjoying more meat-free meals or whatever term you want to use. Talking about enjoying it rather than giving up, I think, is better to do.
Yeah, and I've said also around that I've used terminology like letting go. When you've let go of meat, when you finally let go of meat, dairy, and eggs, that kind of idea, because you're actually releasing it, and you're very consciously and deliberately letting go of something that, for one reason or another, or all reasons, are not great. And around language too, it's very interesting because we can talk about this related to milk, the word milk and the word meat. I've spent a lot of time communicating that the language we use influences people's perception. And the word meat, I think, is very interesting. The word meat originally meant food. So the Old English word meta, M-E-T-E, originally referred to all food. So one of the things I'm really conscious of is not just saying plant meats when it comes to that, and obviously not saying fake or faux, but also saying animal meat, so that we're distinguishing between plant meat, especially if we want plant meat to have legitimacy in our culture. Also saying animal meat. And of course, we do this, I think, with milk. Naturally, we'll say cow's milk, we'll say goat's milk, we'll say animal milk versus plant milk, although some people also say regular milk or, real milk. And we do that with meat as well. We'll say real meat versus, and then the implication is, even if we don't say fake, the implication is that if it's not from an animal, it is fake. So I think using language that also calls animal flesh or fluids, what they are, is also going to help with the language around legitimizing plant-based meats.
Yeah, really good point. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, and I totally agree with the distinction between animal-based meats and plant-based meats.
Of course you do. Now, related to this is you have a book coming out, Paul. You have a book coming out soon. Tell us about the book.
I do, Colleen. I have a book that's coming out in the fall. This is the first book that I'm publishing, and it is about a very important new industry called the clean meat industry, or really the clean animal product industry. And so unlike the type of plant-based meats that we're talking about, there are a number of startups now that are producing actual animal meat without animals. They're producing it with a microscopic cell that you can take, or in some of their cases, they're not even using a starter cell from an animal, but rather they're just building animal proteins from the protein molecule up, synthesizing it. And this industry really has the potential to completely upend and disrupt the animal agriculture industry in the same way, for example, that the invention of the car really rendered the exploitation of horses obsolete for the most part in our society, or how the invention of kerosene rendered whale oil obsolete. I mean, we used to light all of our homes with whale oil, and then when kerosene was invented and patented, the whaling industry was completely decimated within 2 decades. So I have a lot of hope that these companies, along with the plant-based meat companies too, but that the clean meat companies will play a real role in rendering animal exploitation obsolete. And I'm looking forward to talking a lot more about this when the book comes out in the fall. And I'm really grateful to you for bringing it up, Colleen.
Well, of course. No, I'm very excited about it. And it is so exciting. And I don't think anybody's lamenting, whale oil. Like we move on. It's called progress. And we so often romanticize the past rather than looking to the future. I call this romanticizing of the past, especially as it relates to animal products, pasturbation, because we really do. Anything that's related to the past, we just put this little stamp of romanticizing of it, and so we pasturbate. Yeah. We pasturbate. So, but no one's masturbating about whale oil. So it is. We're like in the middle of this change. So, and we're watching people's reaction to it. And so part of that is also communicating to the public what this is and what to call it. Now you're saying clean meat. It sounds a little like queen meat. So it's not Queen, it's CLEAN is what you're calling it. But I have some thoughts on this. So what are some other, I got thoughts. So what are some other terms that are being thrown around to refer to this cultured meat, if you will?
Well, you just hit the nail on the head with one of them. So it's really a fascinating evolution. So the movement for this was really prophesized by Winston Churchill in the 1930s. He, before he became prime minister, he wrote an essay called 50 Years Hence, in which he talked about how we will one day consider it absurd to raise an entire chicken just to get the breast or just to get the leg that you want, when we could grow those parts in a suitable medium without having to raise or kill an animal. And this idea didn't really catch on for a long time. There were some people trying to do it, but it wasn't until around the turn of the century that people started experimenting with actually growing actual animal flesh in vitro. And because of that, the first terms that were used were in vitro meat. Now, in vitro meat, it's hard to think of something that sounds less appetizing. I know when I think of in vitro, the first thing I think of is in vitro fertilization. It doesn't exactly whet the appetite. And so the researchers in this field eventually switched from calling it in vitro meat to cultured meat because it's grown in a cell culture. And that became the term of choice for years. And admittedly, cultured meat really is better than in vitro meat. But there have now been a number of studies and focus groups that show cultured meat actually is not that effective, that a lot of people have a negative reaction to it. It sounds it sounds a little bit gross, maybe not as bad as in vitro, but it doesn't sound that appetizing to eat. cultured meat, and it's a little bit confusing because there are other cultured products like yogurt and so on, and that's not the same process here. And for fish, cultured fish generally refers to fish who are raised in aquaculture, so you have that confusion as well. And so a whole host of other terms have been tested, like pure meat, safe meat, clean meat, meat 2.0, and so on. And the one that tends to do the best is clean meat. And the reason why it's clean is twofold. One, it's cleaner on your conscience because there's no animal suffering involved. And it is also cleaner for the environment, just in the same way you have clean energy like solar and wind compared to dirty energy. You have clean meat compared to the dirty meat. And it's dirty because the meat that is sold today from animals is riddled with feces. You have huge problems with E. coli and salmonella. Clean meat, on the other hand, is produced in a sterile environment that does not have any E. coli or salmonella because, think about it, E. coli, salmonella, these are intestinal pathogens, and needless to say, there are no intestines because we're only growing the actual muscle, the meat. So it's cleaner because it's not bacterially contaminated in the way animal meat today is, and it's cleaner for the environment and cleaner for our conscience. So right now, the term of choice is clean meat. But Colleen, if you have something better, this nascent field of cellular agriculture is all ears to come up with something that would do even better than clean.
Yeah, I don't believe I was invited to any of these focus groups, so I've got something to say.
Great. I'm so eager to hear it.
All right, just brace yourself. I've got a couple. The first one, I'm still working on it. Be open-minded.
All right, I'm listening.
Chocolate.
All right, I'll talk to them about it.
Because everyone loves chocolate. Okay, so seriously,
chocolate, yeah.
Truly, this is very sincere, and I really want you to take this back to your people because I mean it. Because this is an example of where we have given over this word to the animal meat industry, the animal ag industry. Seriously, humane meat. This is humane meat at its absolute core. It absolutely is. And we don't use the word humane meat because we've given it to the animal ag industry. And I think it's something to consider because when people think of humane meat, they absolutely think there's no violence involved. They think there's no suffering involved. And of course, that's not the case. And so I've been playing with that. And in my informal focus groups, Paul, I have been having great success. So clean, I'm not sold yet. It feels too much like a cleaning detergent to me.
Well, there was one person in one focus group who actually mentioned that it sounded like bleached meat, clean meat, bleached meat. But I think the greatest analogy is to clean energy on it, and whether or not people want to conflate those two, energy and food, I don't know. But I like humane. I certainly would use it with people who I thought were motivated by ethics in their food choices, for sure.
So before you go, Paul, I have to ask, what do you see the public's role in all of this, in usage around plant foods? We talked a little bit about it, but do you have any calls to action for people around language and animal products?
Well, I think that we start with ourselves. It's very easy to point our fingers outward and blame others. You blame an industry, you blame the government, whatever. It's very easy for us to do that. But when we have our one finger pointing out, we have three pointing right back at ourselves. And it's important to remember that we must first, as the saying goes, be the change that we're seeking. And by looking at our own language, how we are describing either foods or practices in the animal ag world, that we can help influence how people see the world. It's not just like a language police type of thing. I'm all against the language police just for the sake of trying to be correct. But as you pointed out, we can make a difference in how people think and therefore how they act when it comes to animals and animal products, simply through the way that we talk. So I'd encourage us to think about what type of terms we're using, like what we've been discussing here. And if you really want to stay up to date on this, subscribe to this podcast, and you can hear more and more great ways to do it.
That is very. I thought you were going to say subscribe to Feedstuffs. Like I actually really thought you were going to say that, but you threw me. You threw me. So, all right, question for you, Paul. What gives you hope?
There are a lot of things, but the first thing is I get to travel around the country and I meet so many really selfless, other-centered animal advocates who are dedicated to making the world a better place. And these are people who are not in it for accolades. They are not in it to get wealthy. They are in it because they want to leave the world a better place than they found it. And knowing that those people exist really makes me feel better. I think that, sometimes I hear from people, they feel so guilty for being human. They look at all the damage that humans are inflicting, and it's a totally understandable sentiment. But there are a lot of people who are doing amazing, selfless, kind, compassionate things in the world. And so that gives me a lot of hope. Second, I have a lot of hope because I think about the technological advancements that are making it easier and easier to do less harm to animals. So companies that are making better and better plant-based meats, for example. I mean, you look at a plant-based burger today compared to 10 years ago, and then imagine what it's going to be like 10 years from now. And it's just getting better and better. And the fact that a company like Hampton Creek is outselling its egg-based counterparts within the mayo section, it really gives me hope as well. And then these clean meat companies, or humane meat companies, as you would, really, I think, offer tremendous potential. None of them are commercialized yet, but many soon will be. And I have so much hope that they can render obsolete the ruthless and unconscionable exploitation that we've been inflicting on animals for so long. I agree with you. Do you think about the good old days? It's really the bad old days as far as I'm concerned on a lot of it. But I do see hope going forward in the future because of these entrepreneurs who are creating a more humane society and making it easier to do the right thing.
And Paul, what is your favorite word?
I have a lot of favorite words,
What's one
Colleen.
of them?
Well, animalogy obviously has risen straight to the top now. All right. Probably a word like kindness is what I would think about the most. A lot of the times people, they think about they want to be really smart or they want to be really cool. But really what matters is whether or not you're kind. And, people at your funeral, they're not going to be talking much about how smart you were probably. Maybe somebody mentions it. People really are thinking, though, about what did you do for others? What type of service did you provide? How did you make the world a better place because you existed? And usually that is through kindness. Usually it's through trying to see the world through other people's eyes, empathizing with them, and showing them the type of kindness that too often we deny to animals, that we deny to others, and that oftentimes we even deny to ourselves. So I'm big on thinking about kindness and trying to cultivate it as part of a mentality, to like a screen to run my decisions through when I can. I don't always succeed, sadly, but it's something I aspire to.
That's good aspiration. That's lovely. Thank you. So where can people find you and your fabulousness and, of course, your upcoming book?
Well, you can find me on Twitter. I am at P. Shapiro. That's P-S-H-A-P-I-R-O. And the book, when it comes out in the fall, you'll be able to find it everywhere that books are sold.
Is there a title yet? Is there a working title?
The working title, you'll be displeased to know, Colleen, is Clean Meat. You're going to have to contact my publisher and tell them to change it.
No, it's good. It's good. It'll grow on me. I mean, I'm exercising it, so maybe we'll see what happens. And, the bottom line is the content is what is really important. And, this is all part of a greater conversation that we can all have in the public space, writing to our editors, talking to each other. And I am just so thrilled to have been able to talk to you, Paul. So thank you for joining us today on Animology.
It is my honor, Colleen. I love your show. I love everything that you're doing, and I'm really, really thrilled to be a small part of it now.
I told you, he's pretty awesome, right? Remember, semantics ultimately shape how animal issues and animal products and plant products are portrayed and perceived in the public consciousness. Because of language that sanitizes violence in the industry, abusive industry practices become downplayed, laws that could protect animals never get passed, and the consumption of animal flesh and fluids increases as it is romanticized. As George Carlin said, we think in language. The quality of our thoughts and ideas can only be as good as the quality of our language. This is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thank you for listening to Animology, changing the way we talk and think about animals.